The morning sun touched the runway, painting the silver plains in golden light. People hurried through the busy airport, rolling their suitcases, talking on phones, and rushing to their gates. It was just another day, another flight, until he arrived. Before we dive into the video, please subscribe our channel. An old man, dressed in a clean brown blazer and faded beige shirt, walked slowly toward gate 27. His shoes were polished but worn, like they had walked many miles in silence. His face carried deep lines, not just of age, but of memories. In his eyes there was calm. In his walk, quiet strength. He carried only one small leather bag, the kind soldiers used decades ago. No one noticed him at first. To most people, he was just another old passenger. At the gate, a young woman named Emily sat waiting for the same flight. She was scrolling through her phone, half asleep and bored. When she looked up, she saw the old man standing near the window, staring at the planes outside. Something about him felt different. Not sad, not lonely, just peaceful, as if he was looking at something only he could understand. When the announcement came, Flight 326 to Los Angeles is now boarding, passengers started lining up. The old man took his boarding pass from his pocket. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes didn't. Seat 16A, it said. Window seat. He smiled faintly, as if that seat meant something more than just a number. As everyone rushed in, the crew greeted passengers one by one. "Welcome aboard," they said cheerfully. When the old man approached, the young flight attendant smiled politely, but her smile softened when she saw his face. "Good morning, sir," she said kindly. He nodded gently. "Good morning, ma'am." His voice was soft, but carried the weight of discipline, the tone of someone used to giving orders calmly under pressure. Emily found her seat in 16B, right next to him. She recognized him from the gate and smiled politely. "Hi," she said. He returned the smile with a small nod. "Good morning." He placed his bag carefully under the seat, his movements neat and precise, like a man who had followed orders his entire life. The plane filled with chatter, laughter, and the sound of seatbelts clicking. As they prepared for takeoff, Emily noticed something. While others scrolled on their phones or adjusted their pillows, the old man sat upright, looking straight ahead, hands resting on his knees. His posture was perfect. He didn't move, didn't fidget. It was as if he was still on duty. "Are you visiting family?" Emily asked, trying to start a conversation. He looked at her for a moment, smiled politely. "No," he said, "just going home." There was silence for a few seconds before she spoke again. "Do you live in Los Angeles?" He shook his head. "Not exactly." Something about his answer made her curious, but his eyes told her not to ask more. When the plane lifted off the ground, the old man looked out the window. His fingers lightly touched the glass as the airport below became smaller and smaller. For a second, Emily thought she saw tears in his eyes. Not of sadness, but of memory. Maybe he had been in the air before. Maybe he missed it. Hours passed quietly. Passengers watched movies, ordered snacks, or slept. But the old man never moved from his seat. Sometimes he would open his bag slightly and look at something inside. Something wrapped in a folded cloth. He never let anyone see what it was. He just looked, sighed softly, and closed the bag again. Emily's curiosity grew stronger. "Sir, if you don't mind, can I ask what you do?" He smiled faintly. "I used to fly," he said. Her eyes widened. "You mean like airplanes?" "Yes," he replied, turning back to the window. "A long time ago." Something about the way he said it sent chills down her spine. There was no pride in his voice, no show-off tone, only quiet truth. She wanted to ask more, but his expression told her that whatever story he carried, it wasn't an ordinary one. Suddenly, the plane shook slightly. Mild turbulence. Some passengers gasped. A child cried. Emily held her armrest tightly. But the old man didn't flinch, not even once. His calmness during the shake was almost unreal. He closed his eyes for a brief second, as if remembering how to handle it. "You're not scared?" Emily whispered. He opened his eyes and smiled. "No. The sky has always been kind to me." When the turbulence stopped, Emily noticed something strange. The old man quietly reached into his coat pocket and took out a small silver pin, shaped like wings. He held it gently between his fingers, looking at it as if it was the most valuable thing in the world. Emily leaned a little closer. "Is that from when you used to fly?" He nodded. "Yes, a long time ago. For men who never came back." His words were soft, but they hit hard. The air between them grew quiet. For the first time, Emily didn't know what to say. She felt respect, deep, unspoken respect, for the stranger beside her. The hours rolled on. The old man didn't eat, didn't sleep. He just stared out the window, lost in the clouds. Then suddenly, something caught his attention. His eyes focused sharply on the horizon outside. Emily followed his gaze. Two tiny dots far away, growing larger. She squinted. Are those other planes? The old man didn't answer. His hand tightened on his armrest. The dots grew bigger, faster, sleek, metallic, and sharp. Fighter jets. Emily's heart began to race. Why are they so close? She whispered nervously. The passengers on the left side started murmuring. Phones came out. Windows filled with faces. The flight attendant walked down the aisle, trying to calm everyone. It's fine, everyone. Please stay seated. Everything is under control. But Emily saw the old man's reaction. Not fear, but recognition. His eyes softened. Slowly, he reached up, buttoned his blazer, and turned to look directly out the window. The fighter jets were now beside them, flying in perfect formation. Emily's voice trembled. What's happening? The old man didn't answer. He lifted his trembling right hand and saluted. The cabin went silent. Every passenger froze, watching him. Even the flight attendants stopped walking. The F-35 jets tilted their wings in unison, a pilot's salute. Emily's mouth fell open. Why are they saluting him? She whispered. The old man didn't move. His eyes glistened, locked on the jets outside. After a moment, he lowered his hand, whispered something under his breath that only Emily could hear. They remember. The engines hummed. The clouds glowed gold in the setting sun. The moment felt frozen in time. One of those rare moments when strangers witness history without realizing it. And for the first time, everyone on Flight 326 knew. The quiet man in seat 16A wasn't just another passenger. He was someone the skies still saluted. The cabin was silent. Every passenger stared out the windows in shock. The two F-35 fighter jets glided gracefully beside Flight 326, their wings gleaming under the sunlight. The engines of the commercial plane hummed softly, but the air inside felt heavy with confusion and awe. Emily's heart pounded. She couldn't take her eyes off the old man beside her, the one in seat 16A. He was still sitting straight, calm and steady, his hand now resting on his lap after giving the salute. There was something in his eyes, something between pride and sadness. The young flight attendant, Sarah, walked slowly down the aisle, trying to smile. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice trembling slightly, please remain calm. We are in contact with air traffic control. Everything is okay, but no one moved. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why were fighter jets flying so close? Emily whispered. Sir, do you know why they're here? The old man didn't answer right away. He looked out the window again, watching as one of the jets tilted slightly, showing its silver wings. He smiled faintly. They're saying hello, he said quietly. Emily frowned. Hello, but they're military jets. He nodded gently. Yes, I know. Before Emily could ask more, the plane's intercom buzzed. The captain's calm voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. You might have noticed the two F-35 aircraft flying beside us. Please do not be alarmed. They are friendly jets performing a mid-air escort. We've just received word from Air Command that this is a special honor flight. The passengers exchanged confused looks. Phones came out. Videos began recording. Murmurs filled the air. Emily turned to the old man. A special honor flight? For what? He didn't look at her. He just kept watching the sky outside. His fingers brushed the small silver pin in his pocket. Sometimes, he said softly, the sky remembers what the world forgets. Emily didn't understand. But she could feel that whatever was happening wasn't random. Those jets weren't there by mistake. A few rows ahead, a man in a suit stood up and shouted, Is this some kind of military show? Sarah, the flight attendant, gently told him to sit down. Sir, please, we'll explain soon. Everyone stay seated. The captain's voice came again. This time it was slower, almost emotional. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been informed that one of our passengers is a decorated war veteran, a retired Air Force pilot who once served in classified missions. Today, the Air Force has recognized his service, and they're saluting him. Today, the Air Force has recognized his service, and they're saluting him. A collective gasp filled the plane. Everyone turned to look around. Who was it? The captain continued. He's sitting among us quietly. We don't take this honor lightly. So, on behalf of the crew and every passenger here, sir, we thank you for your service. Emily froze. Slowly, all eyes turned toward seat 16A. The old man remained still. He didn't look for attention. He just nodded once, his gaze never leaving the window. The passengers began to whisper. Someone whispered, It's him, the old man. Another said, I think he's from the Air Force. A few people clapped softly. The clapping grew louder, spreading down the aisle. Soon, the whole cabin was filled with applause. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She looked at him. You're a pilot? She asked softly. He smiled. Was, he said. A long time ago. The jets outside stayed in perfect formation. They didn't leave. They flew alongside, steady and proud like guardians of the sky. Emily leaned closer. "They're really here for you, aren't they?" He looked at her, his eyes glimmering. "Not for me," he said, "for the ones who didn't come back." His voice was calm, but those few words carried more weight than any speech could. Emily sat silently, realizing she was sitting next to a man whose life had probably seen more than she could ever imagine. Sarah, the flight attendant, approached quietly. "Sir," she said gently, "the captain would like to speak with you when we land. The Air Force wants to give you a proper welcome." He smiled politely. "That's not necessary," but she shook her head. "Sir, they insist." He sighed softly and nodded. "All right." The passengers watched him with respect. The young man across the aisle removed his cap and placed it over his heart. A mother told her child, "That man is a hero." The child waved at him. The old man smiled back, lifting his hand in a small salute. Outside, the jets moved closer. Emily could almost see the pilots inside. One of them raised his hand, a salute through the glass. The old man slowly saluted back. It was quiet, brief, and powerful. The entire plane fell silent again. The captain's voice returned one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Air Force requests that we maintain this formation for the next 20 minutes as a tribute. We are honored to be part of this historic moment." Tears filled the eyes of many passengers. Some recorded videos, while others simply watched, moved beyond words. The clouds drifted past, glowing in soft orange light as the sun began to set. The two fighter jets sparkled against the sky, their presence both strong and graceful. Emily whispered, "They really respect you." He shook his head. "They respect what we stood for. I just wore the uniform." She hesitated, then asked, "Did you fight in a war?" He nodded slightly. "A few. Some that never made the news. Some that took everything except my name." His eyes grew distant, like he was seeing ghosts in the clouds. The moment lasted long, yet it felt like seconds. Even the children were quiet. Everyone felt something rare. Pride, respect, and unity, all in the same air. Finally, the jets began to rise higher, breaking formation. The old man placed his hand over his heart, watching them climb into the blue. One last salute, one last silent goodbye. As they disappeared into the clouds, the cabin erupted in applause once more. This time louder, stronger. People stood up, clapping with tears in their eyes. Sarah turned toward him and said softly, "Sir, the skies still remember your name." The old man smiled faintly. "They remember all of us," he said. "Even the ones who fell before the world was watching." Emily didn't speak. She just stared at him, realizing she had just witnessed something unforgettable. A story no one on that plane would ever forget. Outside, the clouds closed behind the jets. Inside, the applause slowly faded. But in that silence, everyone knew this wasn't just a flight anymore. It was history in motion. The old man leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered one final line only Emily heard. "The mission isn't over until the last salute fades." The plane continued toward Los Angeles, carrying not just passengers, but a story the world was about to remember. The plane moved steadily through the golden clouds, but inside, everyone still whispered about what had just happened. The two fighter jets had left minutes ago, yet their echo stayed in every passenger's heart. Phones buzzed with videos, faces glowed with emotion. But one man sat quietly, eyes still fixed on the window. The old man in seat 16A hadn't spoken since the salute. He looked calm, but his fingers tapped lightly on his knee, a rhythm known only to him, like a signal from another time. The soft hum of the engines blended with the sound of his memories, stirring something long buried. Emily couldn't hold her curiosity anymore. She turned slightly toward him. "Sir, everyone's talking about you," she whispered. "Who are you really?" He smiled faintly, still not looking away from the sky. "Just someone who remembers too much," he said softly. His answer only deepened her curiosity. "You said you used to fly. Were you in the Air Force?" He nodded. "Once. Long ago." His tone was calm, but his eyes, they carried storms. Emily hesitated, then asked, "What happened?" The old man exhaled slowly. "That's a story the clouds know better than I do." He looked down at his old leather bag resting near his feet. The edges were worn, the zipper half broken. He reached inside and carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He unfolded it slowly, his hands trembling, not from weakness, but from memory. Emily glanced at it. It looked like an old photograph, a black and white picture of a group of young pilots standing beside a fighter jet. They were smiling proudly, arms around each other, their uniforms neat, their eyes full of fire. "That was my crew," he said softly. "We were called the Hawks." Emily leaned closer. "Which one are you?" He pointed to the man standing in the middle, young, strong, confident. "That was me," he said. Her eyes widened. "You look so different," he chuckled. "That was 50 years ago. Time always wins." Emily studied the picture, noticing something strange. One of the men in the back had a circle drawn around his face, with faded writing near it. She squinted. "What does this say?" He looked at the paper again, eyes darkening. "That says gone but never forgotten." For a moment, silence fell between them. The hum of the engines seemed to fade away, replaced by echoes of roaring fighter jets from another lifetime. He continued quietly. "We flew missions no one talks about now. Missions over borders that didn't exist on maps. We were told we were ghosts, invisible. If we succeeded, no one would know. If we failed, no one would remember." Emily's heart raced. "You mean secret missions?" He nodded once. "Yes. Classified. Even our families didn't know where we were." He paused, staring out the window again. "On one mission, we were sent to rescue a stranded unit. Heavy fire. We made it through the storm, but not everyone made it back." Emily swallowed. "Did you?" He smiled sadly. "Barely. The sky decided to keep me." His words sent chills through her. She could see the pain behind his calmness. The kind that only soldiers carry. The kind no one can see unless they look closely. He carefully folded the picture and placed it back in the bag. Then, he took out a small, old badge. Silver wings with tiny letters engraved in the middle. J.R. Miller. Emily read the name aloud. "Colonel James R. Miller." He looked surprised for a second, then nodded slowly. "That was my name once, Colonel," she repeated, eyes wide. He smiled softly. "I told you I used to fly." Emily stared at him in disbelief. The quiet man sitting beside her was not just a veteran. He had been a colonel, a man who had led others, who had survived missions most people could never imagine. She whispered, "You're the reason those F-35s saluted, aren't you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window once more. "Sometimes respect travels farther than time," he said. But there was more behind his silence. Emily could feel it. A story unfinished, a truth unsaid. Moments later, Sarah, the flight attendant, approached again. Her voice was soft. "Sir, the captain would like to know, were you by any chance Colonel James Robert Miller of the 22nd Squadron?" The old man looked up slowly. "Yes," he said quietly. "But that name hasn't been spoken in years." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, the Air Force database listed you as—" She stopped mid-sentence. Emily turned to her. "As what?" Sarah looked uncertain, glancing at the old man before whispering, "As missing in action. Declared dead in 1985. Emily's mouth dropped open. "Dead? But he's right here!" The old man smiled faintly. "Sometimes the world buries you before you're gone." Sarah blinked, stunned. "Sir, how is that possible?" He leaned back in his seat. "The mission went wrong. My plane was hit. I ejected, landed in the middle of nowhere. By the time I got out, the war had ended. The files were closed, and the world had moved on. I didn't go back." Emily stared at him. "You disappeared on purpose?" He nodded slowly. "Some things are better left in silence. I had lost my men, my brothers. I didn't deserve to go home." His voice cracked slightly, but he kept it steady. Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Sir, they're honoring you now because they found out. The Air Force must have realized who you were when you boarded this flight. He smiled sadly. "I didn't plan it. I just wanted to see the ocean one last time." Emily's heart ached. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" He looked at her and said softly, "Because the man I was stayed behind in that cockpit." A heavy silence filled the air. The engines hummed steadily, but inside, time felt frozen. Then suddenly, the intercom crackled again. The captain's voice sounded different, deeper, almost shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've just received a transmission from Air Command. The escort you witnessed earlier was authorized under the name Operation Sky Honor. It was a classified salute, meant for Colonel James R. Miller, a fallen pilot." Emily turned toward him in shock. "They thought you were dead, and they still saluted you." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Because they know some promises never die." Outside, the sky darkened into shades of deep orange. The clouds turned gold and red, like burning memories. The passengers whispered again, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Some wiped tears. Others sat still, realizing they were flying with a man who had once been lost to history. Emily whispered softly, "You're not forgotten anymore." He smiled faintly. "No one ever truly is. Not when the sky still remembers their wings. He turned back to the window, the fading sunlight glinting off the silver pin on his chest. But behind his calm eyes, something else stirred. Not peace, but a feeling that this flight wasn't just a coincidence. Something, or someone, had brought him back to the skies for a reason. And deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something waiting beyond the clouds. The sky outside had turned golden, fading into soft twilight. Flight 326 was now less than an hour from Los Angeles, but the air inside the cabin still carried the weight of silence. Every passenger knew they were part of something bigger, something they would remember forever. Colonel James R. Miller sat still in seat 16A, eyes fixed on the horizon. Emily watched him quietly, afraid to disturb his thoughts. He looked peaceful, yet his fingers traced invisible patterns on his armrest, as if remembering coordinates only he could read. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, gentler than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed by Air Command that they'll be conducting a final pass, a farewell salute to honor Colonel Miller's service." Gasps filled the cabin. People turned to the windows again. The faint roar of engines echoed from a distance. Two shining dots appeared in the sunset, growing larger, faster, the same F-35 jets, returning one last time. Emily's breath caught. "They came back." Colonel Miller smiled faintly. "They always do." The jets approached gracefully, wings glinting under the dying light. This time, there was something different. A third aircraft flying slightly behind them, smaller, older. The passengers leaned forward, confused. "That's not an F-35, someone whispered. Emily frowned. The third jet had a distinct shape. Curved wings, silver body, and faded markings barely visible through the glare. It looked like a plane from another time. The old man's eyes widened. His hand trembled slightly. "No," he whispered. "That can't be. What is it?" Emily asked quickly. He pressed his hand to the glass, his voice soft but breaking. "That's my old plane. The Hawk 9. The cabin went completely silent. Emily stared, speechless. "Sir, that plane was destroyed, wasn't it?" He nodded slowly. "It was, along with everyone on board." His eyes filled with emotion. Disbelief, sorrow, wonder. Outside, the three jets began to align, the two F-35s on either side, and the old fighter in the middle, glowing in the sunset like a ghost from another era. The captain spoke again, his voice shaky. "Air Command confirms only 2 aircrafts in escort formation." He paused. "But we're reading 3 signals on radar." A collective gasp filled the plane. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, but the radar couldn't lie. The third jet was flying alongside them, visible to everyone. Colonel Miller whispered, almost to himself, "They came for me." Emily's voice trembled. "Who?" He smiled faintly, eyes locked on the old fighter outside. "My crew." For a moment he looked young again, like the man in that black and white photograph. The sunset light reflected off his face, soft and golden. The old fighter tilted its wings, the same signal of salute. Colonel Miller raised his hand slowly, returning it, his movement steady, despite his trembling fingers. The passengers watched, some with tears, some frozen in awe. The jets glided in silence, 3 generations of flight, side by side. Then, slowly, the old fighter began to rise, climbing higher into the clouds. The 2 F-35s followed for a few seconds, then broke formation, circling below. The older jet kept ascending, vanishing into the orange haze. The moment felt endless, like time itself had paused to watch. The old man lowered his hand, his lips moving softly. Emily leaned closer. "What did you say?" He smiled faintly. "Mission complete," and then his hand fell gently onto his lap. Emily blinked. "Sir?" He didn't answer. His eyes were open, peaceful, staring at the fading sunlight. "Sir?" She whispered again, her voice breaking. Sarah, the flight attendant, hurried over. One look at him, and her breath caught. The captain's voice called from the speaker, but no one listened. The cabin fell silent once more. Emily reached out and held his hand. Cold, but calm. She looked out the window, where the clouds shimmered like silver wings. There was no fear, no pain, only peace. The plane continued toward Los Angeles, golden rays spilling through the windows. When they landed, the passengers remained seated. No one spoke. The captain's voice came softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in honoring a hero who took his final flight home." Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks as she whispered, "He didn't die up here. He just went back where he belonged." Outside, soldiers and Air Force officers waited on the tarmac. As the door opened, Sunlight flooded the aisle. Emily watched as they carried him out, his face calm, his metal shining against his coat. And then, just above the clouds, a faint sound echoed, the roar of jets. Everyone looked up. 3 white trails crossed the blue sky in perfect formation, and slowly disappeared into the light. Some heroes never truly leave the sky, because the sky was always their home. Because the sky was always their home.